Hello and welcome to the Practice Discipleship Training Project. My name is Dawn Troutman and I'll be your host today. I'm from the E-Team of the ELCA Youth Workers Extravaganza, something that we will talk a little bit more about at the end if you're not familiar with that event. If you want to find out more about me, you can find out at LutheranLifeCoach.com. This project is a result of the partnership between the ELCA Youth Gathering and the ELCA Youth Ministry Network. The goal is to provide quality training opportunities for adults who are bringing youth to the gathering and for adults doing any kind of ministry with young people. The whole point is we want to equip adults to do excellent ministry with young people. We are in the middle of a series of 7 webinars, and today is the 5th webinar. The design team was intentional in having the first 2 webinars really focus on theology, and then the remaining 5 focus on the practice of youth ministry. Today's webinar is how to lead a small group, and our presenter today is Tiger McLuen, President of Youth Leadership. So you will be able to ask questions as you go, and there are a couple opportunities where we'll just ask for your input or examples from the group. So stay near your computer where you can have a lot of input and type into your screen whenever you have a comment or a question. If you look on the right side of your screen, there is a place for questions. I will keep my eye on that, and we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can. So welcome to Tiger. How are you, Tiger?
I'm doing fine, Dawn. Welcome, everybody.
And I heard you are in the midst, we caught you in the midst of your very glamorous life of President of Youth Leadership. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, well, I was in Bemidji, Minnesota, up in the northern part of the state, doing a training and preaching in a church this morning, which was great, but I just got off a plane. I'm in the corner of the Delta Club trying to be as quiet as possible, and but we will probably have a small group meeting this next hour with some distractions. Maybe noise, maybe an announcement, something like that, but that's typical of small groups. So
it's perfect.
Yes, it is perfect. So I'm looking forward to our time.
Good. Well, let's get right to your presentation, and just a reminder, the box on the right is the place for everybody to write in questions or comments as we go.
Well, great. Today we're going to, as the title simply says, we're going to be talking about leading a small group, and you know, this really is a big part of most youth ministry roles. Often you and I feel unprepared for the task, but leading a small group is something that we almost always bump into, and I think we can learn to do it well. I can't guarantee that your middle school boys are going to love every small group and talk in full sentences, but this session is going to introduce some basic ideas necessary for leading a small group. And you know, you've all been involved in small groups. I have, you have. There's a lot of theory out there, but we're going to try to get practical and help you with some real tips that maybe help you think about the next group you're going to lead. And I just want to get you involved a little bit today. In our small group, we have a small group together. You know, you're on mute, so if you misbehave, I can't notice. But we're going to be together, and I want you to type in some comments, questions, or responses in that box provided. We usually wait for you to hear some information before we do this, but today I kind of want you to jump right in if you could. I'd like you to tell me or tell Don and I about any small groups that you've been in. Were they good? Were they bad? Don't name names. I don't want to know names. But share your experience. What if you were in a good small group? Think back and think of the things that what made that group effective. Why was it a positive experience for you? Or if you were in a negative group, what made it negative? What do you remember about that experience that made it just a group that you didn't like going to, you didn't think was helpful, or whatever? It could be a content Bible study, it could be a discussion group, maybe topical, maybe school. But if you could share a couple of examples, that'll get us thinking practically of what a good small group looks like and what a not so good small group looks like. So send those in, and that'll be good, because they're need to be thinking about the fact that there are many different kinds of small groups, and whether you do it every week or whether it's part of a mission trip or a trip to the gathering, leading a small group is part of every adult's role, and it can be challenging. I don't want to scare you, but I would suggest that the effective use and leading of small groups may be one of the most important skills in youth ministry.
It's just been our first response already.
Wow.
And then I'll let you get going, Tiger, and we'll get some more responses. But Chris already wrote in and said that they were in a small group that was good, and what made it good was that it accomplished a goal. So thank you, Chris, for being the first to answer. And everyone else, please write in and let us know what made your group good or bad.
That's great. And that's a good example of a group that has a clear goal, maybe a task goal, maybe a study goal. Some of those groups are, the clearer the goal, the more helpful, and that's a good example. But using small groups is one of the most important things you're going to do, and there's all kinds of them. Some are just relational conversation groups, some are Bible study groups, but they keep showing up in our youth ministry. They're formal or informal. And so I want to think as we get started and start hearing some of the examples of people, why do we use small groups? We keep doing them. They always show up. But why do we do them? And I would like to suggest a couple things. I think small groups are things that shift from telling people something to helping them think. It moves from talking to discussing. So many things are in control and we're just telling them, but what we're talking about here is small groups where you get to help them think. It also helps them translate information, doctrine, data, information, to application, to start wondering together in a group, why and how does that work, what does that look like? And that means it helps them move from theory to reality. Good theories, good content, good theology. Small groups are often the place where you move to the real world, and people can say, but how does that work in my world? And that's what makes small groups both exciting and often scary. Another thing that small groups do is they allow us opportunity for involvement and peer interaction. Students like to hear from their peers, and they hear from adults quite a bit, but this is the chance for them to hear from each other. And by the way, getting students talking is crucial. Studies show that students remember more of what they say. What it seems that the brain solidifies the content. They remember it later. They don't remember who said it. But if you can get them to say, I believe, or I think, or I hope for, or I'm dreaming of, anything like that, studies show that they then remember that discussion more because they were engaged in it. And so it gives them that opportunity for interaction.
Perfect.
A couple other thoughts about why we use small groups is it helps them see options and clarify their position. What it allows them to do is when they're in a small group versus when they hear just one idea, they get to hear other people's options, and then they get to hopefully have a chance to talk about and clarify, well, this is where I stand. It allows them to experience care and support in a safe environment. Safe environment is really important. We'll talk about that in a minute. And it's a key issue for any small group to have any chance of success is to provide that safe environment. A couple other thoughts is that makes them move from what I call, the drinking from a fire hydrant to leading them to the edge of a deep well where they have to think, interact, wonder, and that's a good thing. And then the last thing is that it provides the opportunity for real life change where they can really apply it, think about it, and hopefully that God can use these times of conversation to really move in their world. And with that, small groups are fun, they're hard to lead, they're energizing, and often they're very tiring. And so I'm wondering if anybody else, Dawn, has shared any other examples.
Yes. Jill wrote that she leads a fellowship group called Drop-In with middle and high school youth, and it's a positive group in that everyone has an opportunity to share, and the group listens and looks at each other, and when they look at each other, each person, when he or she speaks, and everyone feels listened to and supported. So that is using a lot of the elements that you put on this list. So thank you, Bill.
Yeah, that's great. I was thinking of a text that sometimes feels like small groups, because small groups are less, you lose some control with small groups, whereas when you're controlling a 1-hour meeting where you're standing in front, you have some control. It's kind of like in Mark chapter 8, verse 27 through 30, a great little line. Jesus and his disciples were on the way to the village around Caesarea Philippi, and then it says, on the way, he asked them, who do people say that I am? I always used to picture that experience as a teachable, stand up in front and teach and say, who do you say that I am? But that little phrase, on the way, is an interesting idea of the image of them just going somewhere. And then along the journey, he said, well, who do people say that I am? And then you have the confession. What about you? Who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you're the Christ. I kind of picture small groups as those on the way where sometimes they feel out of control, but great stuff can happen. God can reveal things. Kids will sometimes say something in that small group like Peter did that just declared a statement of faith. And that solidified it for Peter, and it solidifies it for us when we realize that these on-the-way experiences are part of the process of our being with kids. It's where that it's more than filling out a worksheet. It's part of the process of coming alongside of kids. Even if it's part of the program, it feels like an on-the-way experience. And although this is not a small group quote, I put it here, Leonard Sweet. I like this reminder because small group can feel on the way kind of stuff. And that's where you just made this observation. The gospel writers are not focused on making an academic case or solving the problem of who Jesus was. They were out to convey a message about the mystery of God being revealed in human form and inviting people to experience the mystery they were a part of. I like this last line. You figure out a puzzle, you solve a problem, but you kneel in a mystery. And I guess I picture small groups as part of, yes, there's times to figure things out. There's time to solve things. But small groups are often part of the process of just journeying with kids. And on the way, hopefully they begin to be revealed in their own spirit some things about their faith, and they can talk about it. And it's not always easy, but it's an important part of it. It's not solving every dilemma. It's not fixing every problem, but it's part of being together. Wondering, Dawn, if there's anybody else that shared an experience that could give us a framework before we get to some tips.
Well, I do. Your tips may address this, but maybe this can help frame it. Jill added that this type of sharing that we're talking about with the I believe, I hope, all that, this type of sharing is difficult for our middle school boys. Jill, you are not alone, first of all. However, I'm trying to work out a format that resonates with them as well. Any suggestions?
Yeah, let's go through the tips, and Jill, if you still have that, it's a critical deal. Couple things real quickly. Middle school boys are the one element of life that's the hardest to do small groups with because they haven't yet formed complete sentences. They only generally have two feelings. I'm angry and I'm tired, or I'm bored. That'd be the third one. So it's kind of hard to get a lot out of them. With middle school boys, a lot of times you're more on the way in terms of smaller chunks, shoulder-to-shoulder conversations, but we'll pick up on some of that. So let me give you some tips about what I think make for leading a small groups. Remember, you can add a comment or question along any one of these, and that was a good question. The first thing I would say is that atmosphere is crucial to any small group. Along with these middle school boys, let's just talk about that. I think the atmosphere is critical. It's the subjective feeling that that matters to most people. Do I feel welcomed and noticed? Do people care about me? Does the leader notice if I'm here or not? Are my ideas welcomed or rejected? That's just something kids are very aware of. If I share an idea, and every time I share an idea, everyone says, "Oh, that's stupid," or "That didn't work," or I learn right away that I can't share. So atmosphere is when you draw people in and invite them in. And that might mean at the beginning, especially these middle school boys, to just break it down to simple things like, if you could go anywhere on vacation, where would it be? Today I'm feeling. That's going to be hard for a middle school boy to answer because he doesn't have a lot of feelings. A good thing that happened this week was, if you could meet anyone in the world, who would it be? To draw them in by just being interested in things that are safer and easier to talk about. A goal I always have is try to get everyone to talk in the first few minutes, even if it's just their name, their school, or something. And if they don't want to do it with a group, have them pair with one another and just say something to somebody in the first few minutes, because that sometimes helps the environment. So atmosphere is critical. The second thing, always remember, and it's easier said than done, but relationships are more important than content. At the end of the day, groups are about the people who come. I know there's worksheets, I know there's curriculum, I know there's content, but don't let that get in the way of the critical fact that relationships are the issue. In other words, what I often say is don't let the job you've been asked to do get in the way of the ministry you're called to do. And the ministry is to come alongside of these kids, affirm them, encourage them, and look them in the eye whenever they speak so that you're saying to them, I'm interested in your world, and I care about you. That's it. Some youth workers do well, but in small groups sometimes we get caught in the content. So a reminder that relationships are more important than content. Thirdly, always remember the purpose of the group. Small groups are not just about running a meeting. They're about a reason for the group. As one first person said, I knew the goal, and we worked towards a goal. Remind yourself that some groups are there to accomplish a task. That's a task-focused group. They want to get something done. They meet together to build a house. They meet together to rake somebody's lawn. And so the purpose of that group is to accomplish a goal. Another kind is that groups meet to study content. And the purpose of the meeting is to study the Gospel of Mark together. And every week we meet. It doesn't mean you don't do other things. So in other words, task groups also do relationships. Content groups also do relationships. But you have a primary goal. There is another kind of group that primarily exists for the relationships, and everything else is secondary. They'll sometimes play, they'll sometimes study, they'll sometimes work. But the point of the group is relationships. So there's task, content, relationships, and the fourth kind of group is influence. That is a group that meets together for the purpose of influencing someone's behavior, each other's behavior. AA groups are a good example of that. They do read material, they do study, they do talk, they do share, they do build relationships, but ultimately an AA group meets together so that people's behavior would be influenced. And until you're clear about the purpose of the group, I have leaders who think the purpose of the group is content, but every kid in the group thinks the purpose of the group is relationships. You're going to have a problem. Or other people think the purpose of the goal is relationships when people in the group are saying, I wish we studied something. So be aware of the purpose. A leader has to know why the group exists and then be sure that it matches the group's goal. Fourthly, I would say that preparation is essential. I love being spontaneous, but spontaneity works best after you've prepared. You should know your goals, your content, any curriculum, any key questions. Have a plan for your time together. Don't plan your small group at the stoplight next to the church. I know you've never done that, but we need to be really working hard to have small groups go well. So if you're going to do a trip this summer, think about small groups. Let spontaneity be on top of that, but think about what do I want to do every night? What's the goal I have at the first night of the mission trip or the first night of the gathering? What do I want to talk with them about? What do we want to process? Have that all prepared so that you have the best chance of being effective in your small group. Fifth thing is, I would say, be graceful. We talk about it a lot, but in a small group, to be graceful. Tread lightly on people and the ideas that they share. Honor their involvement. Kids are often scared of giving the wrong answer or feeling stupid. And so we have to work hard to make the group safe and talk about what it means to do that, confidentiality or whatever else you might have. But be graceful as you lead small groups. Let me pause for a minute, see if, Don, you have any questions or comments?
Not so far, but it's helping actually to have that sort of overall framework of middle school boys, because probably any other group is going to be a bit easier than that. So let's just go for the most difficult example. So thank you for framing it that way.
Okay. Number 6 tip here, and then I want you to be reacting to any of these, giving us any thoughts, comments, either a follow-up question or a comment or experience where this tip might have worked for you. Number 6 is that discipline and control always remains a key issue in leading a small group, not just with middle school boys, but with everybody. And I say control not in terms of controlling every detail, but managing the group so that it has any chance of going somewhere. That's the leader's job. I say it this way: if you're not in charge, someone else is. And that someone else is usually an exuberant, extroverted teenager who wants to run the group. You're a facilitator, but your role includes keeping the group focused. Because if there are consistent behavior problems, distractions, or dominating people, you have to deal with that. A goal I have is affirm in public and discipline in private. But I've never led a small group where I haven't had to address the issue of expectations discipline, control in the sense of what are the expectations, how we treat each other, how do we stay on task, how do we, it happens all the time, doesn't it, where you ask a really profoundly theological question and the kids start talking in small groups about the football game, and you're like, wait a minute, how did that happen? And you're going to have to learn how to pull them back gently, give them room if you want to, but somehow you have to manage the flow of the group, how it's going to manage. And that, for some of us, is very difficult, but I can't say it any other way. It is an issue, and discipline is an issue. And when you deal with it in private, you talk to the person about, here's why we have this group, here's how much I like having you in the group, but here's how what you did was very unhelpful, and let's talk together about how I can help you succeed in this small group. But it won't work if you keep doing that, and it's hard to name it, but we have to. Another difficult subject is the issue of silence. I just simply say, don't be afraid of silence. There's going to be moments where you ask this wonderful question and they stare at you like deers in the headlight. And the issue is, don't answer your own question. There was a study done a while ago, I can't remember who did it, Education Association of some kind, asked, how long do you think it takes when a teacher asks a question before they answer their own question? And you can all think in terms of, in your head, how long do you think it takes between when somebody like myself would ask a question in a small group, pause, and then get uncomfortable and answer my own question? The study showed it was about 2 seconds, which is almost nothing. The study also said that when the teacher thought the students would have difficulty with the question, they gave them less time. And what that means is we tend to be afraid of silence. And if that's at all true, even remotely true, here's what a middle school boy has learned. All I have to do is not say anything for 2 seconds, and you'll answer the own question, and I don't have to do any work. Silence is the time when work happens, and we have to be not afraid of it. So you might want to rephrase the question to say, well, that didn't seem to generate any response. Let me rephrase it. But you can't panic. If you panic with silence, then they win, and they just know that they don't have to talk. Sometimes you just have to smile and wait. Sometimes you just say, you know, somebody's got to have a shot at this. Give me an idea. Keep rephrasing it. Another way is just to talk to yourself about your own fear of that silence. But just be aware of that. Don't be afraid of silence. Number 8 is routines and rituals are a part of any good small group. And every one of you will come up with different routines and rituals, but some kind of patterns. How do you start a group? How do you welcome people? How do you stop it, for example? How do you share? Some people use a ball that they throw around. Some light a candle at the beginning or light a candle at the end. I don't know how you want to do that, but I do think routines and rituals help kids know this is what we're going to do. Maybe we all sit at the same way. We're goofing around and we all sit on the floor, or we all sit at chairs, or somehow you create the idea, okay, this is going to be the discussion part. There's other parts, but this is it. And you use routines and rituals. And I would encourage you to have prayer be a part of that at the beginning or end or both, and have a way that works for your group. Some people use a certain style of prayer. Some people have a same prayer they use to end the group. I don't know what works for you, but patterns are helpful for people and can give some routine. Number 9, a big important thing about leading a small group is work hard to create good questions. Good questions, I think, are as important as good answers. And they are really designed to encourage discussion rather than simply filling in the blank. Try to use open-ended questions, not just yes, no, right, wrong, but leading questions. What do you think about? Vary how you ask the questions. I think there's value to say, just say, okay, I have a question, and then you just lead it out there to the group. But you and I know that what tends to happen is the most talkative, usually, well, you talkative kid will start answering all the questions. So maybe you have to vary how you ask the questions. Maybe you say, I want you to not say anything, but I'm going to ask this question, and I want you to write it down. Write down a word or a thought or a feeling. And then you let them all do that. And then you either let them read it, or you pass them in and you just read the feelings. You get them into pairs maybe. You can name it. You can say, we're going to go around the circle. We're going to start on our left. I want everybody to answer this question. And they'll look at you and go, oh, but you know what, we can do that. If you call on a kid to be participating, this is a little trick I learned. Never put their name at the end of the question, because then that's a threatening club meeting. You say, okay, tell me the difference between the Septuagint and Masoretic texts, Dawn. See, if you say it that way, that just freaks the kid out because they have had no warning whatsoever. And it's usually used as a threat of misbehavior. But if you say, Dawn, I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to listen because I want to see your insights on this. What's the difference between the Masoretic and Septuagint text? And, of course, Dawn, being a good ninth grade girl, would be wonderfully succinct in her answers.
Right.
But of course, but inviting them in, but by saying, Bob, I'm going to ask you this, so then ask it. Invite them, but work hard on good questions that are not trivia, not overly simplistic, but actually invite them to participate. And then you want to ask follow-up questions. That's a great answer. Does anybody else think? What does everybody else think? Anybody else have another perspective? Go deeper. Don't let the first answer be the only answer. And in other words, to do that well, you're going to have to prepare your questions. Most people prepare their content, and then they let the questions flow. I would encourage you to prepare your questions as much as you prepare your content, because that's where the discussion is going to happen. And number 10, guess what? You matter. The leader is crucial. You set the tone. You set the atmosphere. You are that facilitator, not a dictator. You have to work really hard in your listening skills. I think listening is hard to do one-on-one. It's really hard in a group. To remember what's been said, to be able to refer to it later. A good leader has to notice certain things like people. Who's talking this week that wasn't last week? Who is talkative usually and not this week? Are there sub-conversations, and who is that, and is that normal? I call it airtime. Look, listen and notice airtime. Who's taking airtime and who's not? And is that typical? And if not, what's different about that? A good leader is both relational and functional. In other words, disciplined and person-centered. You need to be the timekeeper. You need to be the structure provider, but you also need to be friendly and personable at the same time. It really is important. Last thought I have about you as a leader is have fun. I know a lot of us sometimes get so caught up in the stress of a group that we don't just have fun with them. And you can control a group, manage questions, and still have fun at the same time. And that's when groups start to take on a healthy life. I've sat in on many groups as a speaker where we were there for 30 minutes or so, and I really walked out and said, I have no idea what we did, what we covered, why we met. There was no flow. There was no sense of pattern. I've been in other groups where I've been invited in, and it was manage the worksheet. That's all we did was we worked down the questions, and there was no spontaneity or fun. You've got to live somewhere between those two, where it's rigid, controlled by the worksheet, and loose, doing nothing, heading towards no goals. So wondering if there's any thoughts, questions, comments on those tips, Don.
I have a couple different ones. I don't know if we could, let's go back one slide. Dave was referring to two of those that were in numbers 1 through 5. He said, what are some ways that controlling the atmosphere is dependent on the purpose of the group? Like, how should the atmosphere of the small group Bible study be different than the atmosphere of a task group or an influence group? So it's kind of a question that combines numbers 1 and 3 on those 10 tips.
Right, because it is very different. And I think tying those two together, because, in other words, if it's an influence group, then the purpose of the group shapes the atmosphere, which is it might be a little more confrontational. Someone might say something and someone else will go, I don't think that's right. You shouldn't be doing that. Whereas if it was a different group, that atmosphere may be different. So I think it's good to note that they go together. How you set that up, again, I think determines is based on how you assess number 3, the purpose of the group, and then let the atmosphere follow it. In other words, like I said, I've been in groups where the atmosphere was really friendly, wonderful, kids had a great time, but we didn't accomplish anything. And so you've got to have the atmosphere line up with your goal. So if we are going to get a task, in other words, when I go on a mission trip, we work, and I tell them that. The purpose of this time is we're going to get up early and we're going to work. I'm not big on vacation mission trips. So number 3 dictates number 1. Yes, we're going to have fun along the way, but if I'm on a work site with the kid and the kid's screwing around and not working, guess what? I'm going to deal with that atmosphere. Why? Because number 3 trumps it. We're going to work hard together. Yes, we are going to be able to laugh and have fun, but you're not going to be out playing touch football instead of working on the roof. So does that make sense, you think?
And you make painting a wall fun.
Well, yeah, absolutely. That's what we do in youth ministry. Anything can be fun.
Right. But the purpose trumps the atmosphere. I like what you said there.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So William said, how do you handle the inappropriate but usually really funny interruption? Last night, William was leading a junior high small group. We were talking about something kind of serious, and an 8th grade guy farts. Totally destroyed the moment. How do you recover from something like that? Thank you, William.
William, you're the only one that's had that experience. I'm just shocked. Kids are amazing at their ability to be both funny and inappropriate. That's what I both love about them, and it drives me crazy. Again, I think you balance relationships and purpose, and the goal I would have in there is pull the group and say, okay, I know it's funny, but now let's get back. You just name it. You can't pretend it didn't happen. You just say, okay, if you got any more problems, you can step outside. You can make some light of it, but you want to gain control. And then I would personally encourage you to talk to the kid, because these things don't just happen. I mean, 99% of the time. Distractions are part of a kid's social testing. And I'd sit down with the kid and say, you know what, I love having you in the group, but you really popped a bubble. Well, that's probably a bad image. It just didn't work well when you pulled that off and farted during a group. And I get it. You don't want to yell at it, but you want to say, it would be really helpful to me if we try to control our functions a little bit, and tell me about that. And he may just simply say, well, it just totally caught me, or he'll go, I know. And you can start a relationship with a kid who wants attention. Guess what? He wants attention. But the group needs to focus on the group. So that's some wandering thoughts about that. But I see it all the time, and I think you can do that. But you got to name it. If you don't name it to the kid, he just can do it again. And if you don't name it to the group, then it's hard to pull them back together and say, okay, let's come back together.
So in the short term, you name it, you move on. In the long term,
yes,
you find time to talk to the kid and help them understand. And honestly, what you were saying, tip number 10 with taking your leadership responsibility seriously, that if the kids see that you are taking it seriously, they're going to be less likely. I mean, they don't fart in the middle of the sermon at church. They know it's real. They know that the pastor is taking the sermon seriously,
Yes. That's a good point, and I think you can say that by still being relational. Say, I get it, but look, we can't. That just is not helpful. And to tell them, remind them, we're meeting together to do this, to discuss this, and I know you wouldn't pull it off in school or at church, so let's work on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's keep moving, and as people have thoughts or questions, continue to write them into that chat box. I know, Tiger, you have just a little bit more to say, and then we'll get into some more discussion.
Okay. I always think about people's fears and concerns about leading a small group. So again, another thing that you could maybe shoot in here is what are some fears you have about leading small groups? What are some things when you picture yourself leading a small group, and maybe it's out of one of the 10 tips, but what are some things about leading a small group that kind of make you nervous? What, especially when you think about a Bible study. I'd like to hear anybody who talks about what's the difference between leading a discussion, a topical discussion, well, what movies did you see, that kind of thing, to leading an actual Bible study. What are the fears that go along with either kind of group, but in particular, what are the fears about leading a Bible study? And what makes Bible study difficult, if that is difficult for you? I think of a couple things that I've heard over and over from small group leaders. One is a fear of inadequacy, a feeling like I just don't know enough about, and then you fill in the blank about the topic we're talking about the Bible, or just feeling like, boy, if I'm going to do this well, I need to be better at that, and I just don't feel adequate. That's a common kind of struggle. A second is a lack of control in small groups. The fear is I'm going to lose control, and this example of the kid, farting is a perfect example. We have this fear that every group is going to be on the edge of loss of control, because we have this issue of, how do I manage it? How do I be friendly but control at the same time? One of my tips is, do atmosphere and control. And how do I do that? In lack of control, that's why running a program, you have more control. Giving a 10-minute talk, you have more control. But the minute you sit down and say, let's talk, you lose control. You lose control to kids who are immature and want attention, and you lose control to the verbal kid, and you lose control to the monosyllabic kid, and it's hard, and that's a fear I've heard a lot. Another fear is the tension that's always there between doing what I said about task and people, where you're discipline and control, but you're still friendly. You name issues that sometimes are hard to name, and yet you still are trying to be a person that has a relationship with them. That's a struggle for a lot of us, how to manage tasks and really be people-centered at the same time. And the last one is, I think, the question of, will they like me? Many small group leaders say, I just don't, at the end of the day, in fact, some people have said, one of the things about leading a small group that's hard for me is it makes me feel like I'm back in 8th grade trying to get kids to like me, because it's hard. And I can't answer all of those, but those are some of the fears I've heard. I'd like to hear from anyone out there in terms of any of the tips, or if there are some fears that you have that kind of tend to cause you to stumble a little bit as a small group leader, or struggle with how to do things. It'd be interesting. And if you do feel inadequate, obviously you can go back to how Lutherans read the Bible to get some strength on that, and remind yourself about leading that Bible study kind of thing. And there'll be some other kinds of stuff there too.
Tiger, I wonder if you could equip people with a few key phrases to fall back on. I think there's a couple kinds of inadequacy. One is like not knowing the information that a kid could ask. The other could be things like going through that sort of minefield about social statements. What do we believe about XYZ issue? So a couple different things in that inadequacy between information and then also kind of social things. What do I believe? What does the church believe? Are there any kind of phrases for leaders to fall back on in those situations?
That's a great question. I don't have any magic phrases right now. Sitting here in the Delta Club. When it does come to the social statements, I do think you want to always be aware of your personal and the official church position, because you have to represent both. And I think if you only share your personal opinion that may or may not be in line with the official church's position, your local church or denomination, you can get in real trouble, and you're not being helpful to kids. And if you just give the official one, you may also not be helping them really wrestle with the application piece of life. So I don't have a phrase for that, but I think it's important to be able to name both those. And when it comes to inadequacy, one other thought about inadequacy, I think it's really okay for a leader to say, I don't know the answer to that. But I will check on that. In fact, next week, that's a great question. Next week, I will do my homework, and let's talk about that next week. And what that says to them is you're on a journey too. No leader has to declare that they've got it figured out. Right. So saying I don't know does not lower your authority as a small group leader.
Great. Yeah, I love that. William says that his fear is that he doesn't relate anymore, that he feels kind of old. He says it's probably some kind of age-related thing. What do you say to the old ones among us?
I have no ability to relate to old people personally.
Oh, no, if youth worker is old and the
No. I get what you mean. Yeah, because being 58 years old, I totally get that.
Yeah.
I often, when I speak at middle school gatherings, think, what in the world am I doing here? I'm way too old for this. But that's a voice of inadequacy speaking. And the inadequacy is I got to be young, cool, relevant to be able to relate to kids. And I would say to William that I don't know of kids who determine their reaction to an adult based on age. They'll do it for lots of other reasons. An adult doesn't care, isn't interesting, is mean, is boring. Well, those are good reasons why kids will disconnect to an adult. But I have not found that my age has created the gap that I thought it might. As long as we can look them in the eye as if they really matter, listen to their world, pay attention, and lead a group because we care to be with them and have fun with them, I think most kids are going to go, wow, you're kind of a crazy old guy, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you. Tanya asked, what happens when a kid just really disagrees with something? They just don't believe something that's church-related. How should Tanya handle that?
And they, of course, want to make sure that the group agrees with them? Is that what Tanya's thinking?
Well, yeah, you know how the kid is like, I don't know what happened in Tanya's group, but there's always sometimes the kid that says, I don't believe in God. You're just not going to convince me. I'm done.
You know, and I would say that's when atmosphere trumps everything. And you say, you know what, make up a name. Jeremy, that's great. I appreciate your honesty. We want to be honest in this group, but there are a lot of us, and I have to tell you, the purpose of this group is to help us grow in our faith. And so I want to keep you coming. But the fact is, you've shared that, I get that, but we're not here to convince you, but we'd love to have you be in this discussion because there are a lot of us that do believe, and we'd love to talk about that. And then that's where, in the group you say that, and then afterwards you say, you invite them personally and say, I really am glad you're here. I think this is a great group for you. But I can't have you, we get your position. We can't have you trying to control the group to agree with you either. So the purpose of this group is this. I really want you here. How can I help you succeed in this group, which is a Bible study, with your position? And I want you here. But you got to name that, or he'll just keep feeling like I have to say it every time, or no one's going to listen to me.
Right. Thank you. And Becca said, is there a difference in how you handle a short-term group, like your small group going to the youth gathering that'll just meet for that week or 10 days, that has a distinct start and end point, versus a long-term group like a senior high Bible study that goes 9 months through the school year?
That's a very good question, and I think, yes, there are some distinct differences, and I think she's named it. It has a start point, end point. It has a purpose wrapped around an event, the gathering or a mission trip. Usually relationships are partly built by being on the gathering trip together or on the mission trip together. So it's relationships that are kind of forced by the event itself. And so I think you really have to work on clear expectations. Be real upfront about it. We're going to meet every night from 9 to 9:30 to debrief the day, and we're going to do these 3 things, and be clear. We're going to share perspective. We're going to look at one text from the day, and we're going to talk about highs and lows and pray for one. I don't know what they would be, but debriefing a day at an event, I personally am biased about this. I think we have to debrief the day to have any chance for kids to really notice what God might have done in their life that day, whether it's on a mission trip or at the gathering. And those, as she said, are beginning and end, and I think we'd be real clear about here's what we're going to do, and name the purpose, and get them to buy in on that. And then during the week when they're tired and they don't want to meet, you say, remember we just said we're going to do half an hour or 45 minutes, and here's what we're going to do. And then to know that at the end there's an ending. Now sometimes these things, people will say, but we want to continue this group, and then you create a new group that has a new understanding of itself. But she's exactly right. These are the kind of groups that have a distinct beginning, ending, and then you've got to help name the purpose and see if that can have common buy-in on the event.
And that leads to how do you handle beginnings and endings? Do you have any suggestions for what a leader can do at the last session of a group? you know, to just have
Yeah.
closure.
That's good. Like at the end when they get back from a deal or whatever. I think we don't.
Yeah.
I just don't like. Personally, I've come to find that fading out is not a good ending. You know, just
Just like a rock song, not a good
yeah,
ending.
yeah, it's just not. You know, just so you want to be clear about it, and so maybe the ending is the last night at the gathering, because you know when they pile off the bus when they're home, you aren't going to have an ending because they're tired and they've been sleeping on the bus and they're going to just roll out of there. So you know you got to define when the ending is, and then you have a celebration and you talk about what the week was, what were the highlights, what were some things that they. I really think an ending should be moving to application. So, and that last ending, you review what you've done, whether it's on the mission trip or at camp or at the gathering, and then you spend that time talking about now what? What's going to be different when we go home? Give everybody share 2 things that they believe that they should do when they get home. They should do, they shouldn't do, they want to start, they want to stop, and name that stuff, and even write those things down, and then pray together about what they've shared. What did the gathering mean to them? What did they say? They said, I learned this week, and I want to do this when I go home. I learned this, and I want to not do this when I go home. Get everybody to share that. Conclude the time in prayer for one another. I think, again, a ritual of some kind of affirmation, make it be a little more. Try to do what your group can do, maybe get in a circle and pray together, put their arms around each other, something. You don't have to go crazy, but just try to do something that defines the ending of the review, application, now what, and close in a sincere moment, time of prayer together. I think it's the best way to end, and then let it go and see what comes out of those things.
Thank you. There's always a question, and thank you, Kristen, for asking about books and resources. What kinds? I know that you have thought about this ahead of time, so could we take just a moment to look at some of these resources that you suggest?
There are a lot out there, and most of them are written for adult groups, and of course there's some things that transfer, but there are some things that don't. So we have a few that just are particular to small groups of students. One is Lori Polich has one on the upper right, Small Group Strategies, Ideas, and Activities. A good little book written with Charlie Scanlon. On the upper left, she has one called Help, I'm a Small Group Leader, which is a little book, real simple book that people can look through. Excuse me, and what's not in there is she also did one that is a video series with the Skit guys on how not to lead a small group. And that's a good little resource. It can be kind of funny to talk about the different kinds of people you have in a small group, and the Skit guys, if you've seen them, are fun. So it's a DVD called How Not to Lead a Small Group. And then what every small group leader should know, the 99 Thoughts about small group leaders are, again, little resources that can get you thinking about this and build a little bit. If you want to go deeper, there's quite a few if you go on Amazon, but they're mostly, as I've used them and read through them, they're more theory or real adult-oriented in terms of its style and content. But these are ones that would be good resources, I think.
Thank you. And just to continue with discussion, Andy, one second, I have to find your question, Andy, I'm sorry. What about when relational conflict interrupts between 2 members of the group? Like when good friends get in a fight outside the group and then they come to the group, they're still mad, it's hurting the integrity of the group experience. What are your suggestions with that?
Similar kind of pattern. That's what you have to notice, the airtime, the relationships, and all of a sudden, and a lot of times, unfortunately, they don't give you a heads up. You notice it about 7 minutes into the group, right? And then you're thinking, oh my gosh. So again, you have to make a decision as to whether you can manage finishing the group as is by just saying, sounds like there's something going on, let's move on, or we'll pick up on that later. If that works. If not, sometimes you have to deal with it. But I generally, in those cases, prefer personally to deal with that between the 2 of them alone. Affirm in public, discipline, or, excuse me, deal with control issues in private. So I would do my best to manage the group, and then afterwards stop and catch the two that were having the problem, say, what's going on, what can I do to help? This really got in the way of the group, or what can we, and really help them see how their behavior, which is a great social developmental skill, how their personal behaviors are affecting the larger group. But you have to make a judgment call as to whether you can make it through by just maybe acknowledging, I know it sounds like there's some things going on, but can we focus on this? Sometimes you can do it, other times you can't. And you have to decide.
And how do you feel out that line between how involved you are in the personal lives of the youth? At that point, you're talking about things that are happening outside the group.
Exactly. Well, and the thing about small groups is being on the way experiences is stuff outside the small group comes into the small group. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you just give a talk to 10 kids, nothing outside really affects that. Small groups are messy because what happens outside comes in, what happens in goes out. And so I think you have to get involved if it affects the group. Remember, your primary focus is as it affects the group. And so if it is affecting the group, you have to try to name it, help them with it, learn from it, and move past it.
Thank you. And I know this we talked earlier about how to end a group well, and we've a little bit mentioned how to start a group well. Can we just kind of put those all into a nutshell? You had mentioned get kids talking within the first couple minutes, have some non-threatening questions. Are there any other things when you start a group with youth who do not know each other well, or that, there's a couple pairs of friends, but they don't all know each other?
Yeah, again, I would say you work on and helping them hear and talk about why we're going to meet. Excuse me. Are we going to task group? Are we going to be a content group? Is this a new Bible study forming? Is this a new relationship group we're forming? So part of it is figuring that out. And then just design a whole lot of opening stuff. I'm a visual image person, so I think in terms of a funnel that you open the part of the group, the first few meetings even, much wider, and you're just there to draw them in. And you don't have every group like that. But you ask them about their childhood. You ask them about relationship with their parents. What do you like doing in your spare time? What are some kinds of vehicles you would love to own if you could? Where would you go on vacation? Anything that's just easier to talk about. Because a new group is when people are thinking, what am I going to say? Are they going to like my ideas? Am I going to feel stupid? And so try to design questions that don't create the kind of division we've talked about. I don't believe in God, or that's a stupid movie, or something where it's easy and you can just get people to share. Is at the beginning of a group helpful to well, what's that about? That's about atmosphere. At the beginning of a group, you really focus on atmosphere. After a while, hopefully, you've developed the atmosphere, and your routines and rituals and discipline and control are part of that atmosphere. But at the beginning, you have to be pretty intentional about your atmosphere, and be thinking of, when I'd say design questions that are less difficult to answer, less threatening, less divisive, and more inviting would be key parts about starting a group. Remember, always in line with why the group is meeting. So if you're a task group, you do a few relational pieces to get to know each other, and then move on to getting going on the task. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes. So Ivan has a question. How much do we let the group wander and follow its own agenda, its own curiosity, which might still be valid and important, versus sticking to the curriculum materials or goals?
Well, Ivan, again, I try to paint the scenarios on the extreme, because there's never, one easy answer. But I've been in groups where the worksheet controlled everything, and it just felt rigid. It felt controlled. And then I've been in groups where the kids ran the meeting and the leader wasn't doing anything. And neither of them, I think, are very helpful. A leader has to do where you say, you know what, I appreciate that, good stuff, but let's get back to the point at hand. The conversation we started was here, and I'd like to get back to it. And you make a personal determination as to whether the side conversation is helpful or simply a distraction. And that's a leader's job, and it's hard to, I mean, there's no easy answer, but sometimes you're right. When kids participate, they go off the worksheet, but where they go is great. And it's about a discussion about faith and life and God, and you're kind of going, this is good stuff, and then you let it go. But other times, you've been in a group where you're like, we are now talking about Twilight movies, and that's not the point.
Right.
And you just have to make the determination, say, I appreciate that, but we got another 10 minutes. I want to get back to this. We'll catch the movie after we close. You know, you can do it somewhat lighthearted, but again, it's our job, and we have to name it. If it's just a rabbit trail that they pursued, that it has nothing to do with anything. And I know that's never happened to anyone else, but it's happened to me a few times where kids are just doing their own thing.
Well, thank you. That's a good way to end, and I'm going to wrap it up because our hour is up. But thank you, Tiger, for being here.
Well, I'm glad that the Delta Club was nice and quiet for me. I'm sorry I have a cold, but it was great to be with you guys.
Well, and I'm glad no flights were delayed and they didn't have to announce it in the Delta Club.
That's exactly right.
Exactly. So thank you for being here. If you do have further questions for Tiger, he can be found through Youth Leadership by email or through the network. And you can also meet him actually at the ELCA Youth Ministry Extravaganza, and I'll give you more information about that in a slide or two. Tiger will also be with us at our next webinar, which is in 2 weeks, Sunday, December 18th at 2 o'clock, where our topic will be faith conversations. So a couple of quick reminders. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, and it'll be archived on the ELCA Youth Ministry Network website. We encourage you to download it, use it with other members in your congregation, send it to your volunteers, send it to colleagues, whoever you think might benefit. And I know that the focus of the webinars is more, you know, the gathering and working with high school youth, but as you can see, we talked a lot about middle school youth too, so if this is something perhaps that your confirmation guides might benefit from, send it to them too. This and all 7 webinars will be presented at workshops at the ELCA Youth Ministry Network Extravaganza. That's happening at the beginning of February in New Orleans. For those of you who don't know, the Extravaganza is the church's annual gathering for adult leaders in children's and youth ministry. So there are lots of speakers, including Tiger. If you listen to previous webinars, Terry Elton will be there, Dr. Jeremy Myers will be there, and many, many other speakers. But if you want to connect with anyone you've been hearing on the webinars, you can do that. There's workshops, there's music. This year's theme is Go, and the event focuses on spiritual renewal, great continuing education, and opportunities to network with others who are doing the same kind of ministry. More information is available, and you can see the website right there at the bottom of the screen. It's elcaymnet.org/extravaganza. Also, each synod in the ELCA has a trained coach who will be offering training seminars, as well as the content from some of these webinars locally in your own synod. So you can look on the calendar to find your local training by going to elcaymnet.org/ELCA Training Overview. As I mentioned, our next webinar with Tiger is scheduled for December 18th at 2 o'clock Central, so that is 1 hour earlier, and please join us for that. You can register by going to elcaymnet.org/ELCA Training Overview. Again, this is Dawn Troutman, and thank you so much for joining me, for joining Tiger, and have a great Sunday, a great Advent, and we will talk to you in a couple weeks. Goodbye.